So regardless of what program you're in, what class you're in, you really need to take notes. Note-taking is really, really important to help you study, to help you retain information, and especially if you're a read-write learner, taking notes is going to be something that helps you retain information quite a lot. So let's go through how to take effective notes. So if you've already watched the test-taking tips video, you recognize this cone of learning that I had in there. The thing is that if you've never really been used to taking notes, it does take some practice to learn how to take notes. So if you feel like you don't really know how to take notes, don't think that that's a reflection on your intelligence. It's a skill that you just develop over time the more that you do it. Taking notes helps you pick out what the key points are. It helps you with studying. And depending on what your learning style is and what you prefer, there are different ways that you can actually take notes. A lot of the times you don't find out what works and you don't find out what you like until you go through some trial and error. So, a lot of the times it can be really hard for students to take notes in class. Sometimes taking notes alone gives students anxiety because you're worried about catching everything that the instructor says, about not missing any important information. You're too embarrassed or afraid maybe to ask the instructor to repeat themselves or to explain what something means, so then you end up with these big gaps in your notes. It can also be a source of anxiety if the teacher talks way too fast or doesn't repeat important points to give you enough time to write stuff down. There are some instructors who kind of hop all over the place, so if the lecture is disorganized, then it becomes difficult to take organized notes. For some of you, it gives you anxiety if you're not given the PowerPoint slides. Now, not only do you have to write down the information that's on the slide, but you also have to write down the information that is coming out of our face. And that can be another source of anxiety as well. So, usually what students try and do is write down everything that's on a slide, everything that comes out of our mouth, everything that's in a book, and it stresses them out. They miss things, they get frustrated, and they just want to quit and not do it anymore. So there are some other ways to do this. The first thing is that you got to know your teacher. So before you can take notes in class and you can take effective notes, you really want to pay attention to your teacher's behaviors. So there are certain things, apparently I have learned from my kids, that I do when I'm stressing a point or I'm saying something that's important. I will never, ever say, hey, this is important, write this down. But sometimes I might I might say it louder. I'll repeat it several times so that someone gets the hint that I'm saying it several times so that you write it down. Or I will spend quite a bit of time on that concept and give several examples to go along with it. So this way, if you don't quite understand the definition, then you also understand, you might understand the example that goes with it. But there are other teachers who do other things. Some teachers flat out say, why is nobody writing this down? Or would say, this is important to know. So you need to pay attention to those cues from your teacher, because that will help you know when you need to jot stuff down. Honestly, as teachers, we hate telling you that you have to take notes. At this point in the game, in college, at this stage of your life, having already completed, at the very least, high school or a GED, you should know that you need to take notes. So if we are giving a lecture and you're sitting there not taking notes, we purposely will not tell you to start taking notes, because that's something that you should know to do all on your own. I hate the question, is this going to be on the test? look, if I have spent the time to put it in a PowerPoint, and if I'm taking the time in class to talk about it, then it is something that you need to know. Because if it's not something that you needed to know, why am I going to waste your time or my time talking about it? So if it's handed out to you, if it's talked about, if it's discussed, anything that happens in class, on a discussion board, in email, anything that you had access to for that class is fair game for a test. On one of my final exams, one of my questions is, what is my email address? And even though students have it on the syllabus and they use it constantly throughout the quarter, you'd be surprised how many people get that question wrong. So if I'm talking, you should be taking notes. And please don't ask, is this going to be on the test? Because most teachers are going to go, I don't know, I guess you'll find out when you see the test. But you need to realize that everything is fair game. So don't write everything down. If you're in the college success course, your textbook talks about using abbreviations. And for some things, there are preset abbreviations. But it's actually better if you create your own kind of abbreviation system. So this way you understand what you're saying later when you look at your notes. So creating your own version of shorthand is a great thing that you can do. The other thing that you want to do is just write down the metamessage. So the metamessage is just the basic gist of what the teacher's talking about. So maybe a teacher's going to tell a story to get to the point. Don't write down the whole story, write down the point. The other thing is that when an instructor writes something on the board, or in a PowerPoint, we're putting it in the words that make sense to us. You need to then translate that in your notes in a way that makes sense to you. Because if you write it the same way we write it, when you look back on it a few days later, you might not understand it because it's in our words instead of your own. It's always, always, always okay to stop us and ask us to repeat something or to slow down, or to ask us to hang on a second so that you can catch up. We don't know unless you tell us. And you don't need to write your notes in full sentences or in full paragraphs because that will take you a lot longer. If you're someone who works really well with examples, write down those examples and they'll trigger your memory later. You can use a laptop, or there are even note-taking apps. So if you have if you type faster than you handwrite and you prefer to type, and you have a laptop, you have some kind of device, bring it in and use that to take notes. Just let the instructor know what you're doing. Because if I'm anticipating you taking notes on your laptop, but you're really posting on Facebook, and as I'm walking around the room and I see that, that's not going to be good for you. The other thing that you can do, if you get anxiety while you're trying to take notes, a great thing to do is to actually record the lecture. Now, you do need to ask the teacher's permission before you do this. Some instructors will allow you, some will not. For the teachers who allow you to record the lecture, you still need to let them know that specific day if you are recording, just so that they're aware. But this way, it'll ease some of your anxiety. So if you don't get a chance to jot down everything that was said, you have a backup, and you have the backup audio. Another thing that's great is that if you're someone who has a really long commute, you can kind of multitask and use your commute time as study time by listening to the lecture while you're driving instead of the radio, and then you can be studying while you're driving. So these are just some note-taking tips that I stole offline. If you look in the upper left corner with the note-taking guidelines, we've already mentioned all of those. I thought the life hack was interesting, that if you're typing notes and you use a funky font, that you'll have a tendency to remember it better because it is in a stranger font than you might be used to. I love the pie chart. Well, I wrote it down because everybody else wrote it down, so I guess I had to write it down too. On the upper right-hand side, the N, O, T, and E we already talked about. The S doesn't really apply in this case because we're not turning it into an essay or something like that. So you could always pause this, or you could even rewind it if you want to go back and read these a little bit further. So one of the most popular ways to take notes, whether you're typing them or you're handwriting them, is called the outline style. And I have an image of what this looks like. It is the most recommended style. Now, this format that's in the picture includes Roman numerals and A's and B's and numbers. You don't have to use those kinds of things. Personally, if you've ever been in one of my classes and you see the way that I list notes on the board, I use arrows. And each of my subcategory it's like a double arrow, or a triple arrow, or something like that. And that's the way I've always taken notes since I've been a student. So that's the way I then deliver notes. And that's another thing that you need to remember, is that teachers give notes the way they're used to taking them. So that's why you shouldn't copy them down exactly how we have them, because you might need to translate them into something else that helps you. The outline style is the most popular, though, because if you notice, these are not full sentences, these are not full paragraphs, and it organizes information as far as what sections are further breakdowns of other sections and what goes together and what doesn't. So this is one way that's really popular. Another way is called the Cornell Method, and this one is when you split your notebook. A blank example of this is in the bottom right corner, and then a filled out example is kind of in the top right corner. So some students really like this, where you actually split your notebook into 3 sections. One of them, if you look at the bottom right corner, the one that's labeled number 1, that would be where you would put the notes during class. And again, do it in kind of an outline form. 2 would be anything that as the teacher's talking you have questions about, things that you remember from the reading, anything that jogs your memory after class or during class would go in that column. And then the bottom section would be where you list kind of the main ideas or the metamessage that came out of that day's lecture. You can use this method when you're taking notes out of a notebook or out of a textbook as well, and it's common. To be honest, from what I've seen students use the outline method more than the Cornell, but to each his own. Do what works, not what's popular. So another way of taking notes is called the visual style, and I've had several students who do this because they are unbelievably artistic. And I would be lecturing and they would be drawing, and sometimes initially when I would first see them do this, I would double check that they were drawing and paying attention as opposed to drawing because they were bored. And usually my visual, my artistic, and my kinesthetic learners use this the most. So instead of actually writing down all of the information, they might use like a brainstorming map that you might be used to down in the bottom left corner from high school. I have actually had students take notes that look like the bottom right picture, even though I stole it off Google. So that's actually a scientific thing about microbes and sweat and what lives in your belly button. And or then in the upper right corner are pictures of kind of main ideas that happened during a lecture, and it turned into almost like a a mural almost. So this can work. If you are someone who's very artistic, who needs to draw, who remembers things better through art, this can be a great way for you to take notes as well. So one thing that you want to do after you've taken the notes is actually look over them immediately when class is over, if not at least within a day, because so many students will, they enjoy rewriting their notes to make them more organized. But you want to look over the notes so this way you can clarify anything that you might misunderstand, so that you can reinforce what was done in class, and it gives you enough time to clarify your notes with the teacher before a test happens. I had one student quite consistently. She worked very hard over several months to really learn how to take notes in a way that worked for her. And so often she would come to me and go, "Why did I write this down?" And it would take me a minute to remember. And then we would talk about why she wrote it down, and she was able to then take clearer notes the second time around. So sometimes you need to do that, and that's okay. So the R's of note-taking, again, these are all stolen from Google. I have to say, the picture that's on the right with everybody standing up and now taking pictures of the board is probably one of the funniest things that I see happen in class anymore, because even though I'm not that old, that was never, ever, ever an option when I was in school. You had to write everything down. So now when I see my kids just stand up and take a picture of what I've written on the board instead of writing it down, it cracks me up. The problem with that, though, is, again, some students really need to write things down to absorb it, because you know you've sat in that class going, "Oh yeah, I don't need to write that down, I'll remember that." And then the test comes and you're like, why didn't I write that down? I didn't remember it. Or even like a grocery list. You're like, "I know I will remember to pick up the broccoli." And then you come home and it's the only thing that you didn't get. And it's the end. So the thing about taking notes is you really have to find the style that works for you. There's no right way. Well, I shouldn't say that. There are definitely some wrong ways, and there are a couple of right ways, but sometimes people make hybrids out of these different things. Some people might like to do the outline method and combine it with the visual, but it really takes some practice to see what style you like the best. So if you need any help figuring it out, that's what I'm here for.